All 180 Genesis songs ranked from worst to best. That is the quest that Ryan Reed took on for Ultimate Classic Rock. And Ryan is here with me right now. I am Matt Wardlaw. Ryan, this was an epic task for you. So I obviously want to discuss like what went into putting this list together.
Yeah.
But I wanted to start by talking about the hypothetical worst song on this list, which would be Me and Virgil. How much did you have a clear idea of what was going to be the last song on this list going in, and how does it earn that slot as the quote-unquote worst song on this list?
Yeah, I had a feeling that it would be the worst. I knew for sure it would be in the bottom 10. It's always been one of those songs for me. I do not listen to it because the first once or twice that I heard the song, I was like, oh my God, I cannot stand the song. So it felt like it probably was going to happen, but it's also just such an outlier in their catalog, which I think makes it
Mm-hmm.
kind of an obvious pick for the bottom track as well. Phil Collins notably hates the song, and they even left it off the second archive box set from 2000. So that kind of gives it an edge, I think, over some of the other ones that maybe were in consideration. But as part of the process, of course, I went back and listened to everything, including stuff that I listen to all the time and some stuff that I don't. And that one just it leapt out again as an obvious choice. It's the kind of rootsy vibe. It just does not fit the classic Genesis style. So I think being an outlier, and then also just not being a very good song in my opinion. And I don't say that very often about Genesis, but that made it a pretty clear choice. Definitely, it was going to be toward the bottom 5 or 10, but when I went back through it, I even wrote in my notes, definitely the worst. So, yeah, unfortunately, that's that is what it is.
That is one of the things that you and I kind of talked about was that, like, from my side of things, I think sometimes you see a list like this and there's like the bulk of the group's catalog, and then it's like those last like 40 or 50 songs that you can just easily go, all right, those are all garbage, and kind of pretty easily put those at the bottom of the
Yeah.
list. But Genesis really is not one of those bands. Like, this had to be pretty tough just because, like, the bulk of their catalog, I think it's pretty fair to say, is really solid. There's a lot of really good stuff. Like, there aren't a ton of clunkers in the Genesis catalog from my side of things.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, we talked a while back, kind of about the split between their catalog. It's I feel like I don't know if it's because I'm just so biased, being such a Genesis obsessive, but I would say at least half the catalog to me is almost perfect or perfect, and then you've got probably 45% that's really strong or pretty good in some way. There's some quality about the song that I like. It's not a complete wash, but then there's that like 5% maybe is what I would say is bad or bordering on bad. So it's like when that's the catalog, that's a pretty tough challenge. It's not like, yeah, like you said with most bands where you can pretty clearly this album, oh, these 5 songs are the good ones. These few are like, they're okay, and these couple are not so good. For me with Genesis, it's not really like that. There's so much nuance, even in a song that's kind of okay for them. There's so much you can enjoy in it musically. So it was a very, very tough challenge, even tougher than I expected.
So I wanted to read this and share this with folks that haven't read the list yet, which we're going to link in the description for this video. In your introduction, you wrote, for some fans, they're always going to be the long-haired dudes with Mellotrons and Fox costumes. Not many bands can say that, by the way. Playing 20-minute epics, and for others, the group might as well not exist until Invisible Touch. Now, ranking their songs is beyond difficult for that reason alone. How to pit, say, the new wave punch of Abacab against the prog folk warmth of Trespass. So, from your perspective, like, how did you approach that, kind of analyzing the Collins era versus the Gabriel years?
Yeah, that was probably the toughest thing about this whole project for me was comparing and contrasting those long, complex prog songs with the concise, catchy pop stuff. That was the hardest thing for me. I don't know if I did the absolute best job with that, but I did at least try to capture my gut feeling about every song. I didn't have any criteria other than what am I responding most to? What do I objectively think is the best with each individual song, regardless of if that's a 2-minute song or a 23-minute song. I would say just how successful is this song at doing what it's trying to do. So obviously, like I kind of hinted to a second ago, part of that process was going back and listening to every song. And so I would listen to a song and just give a gut reaction on a 0 to 10 scale. I would say, what do I really think about this? How successful is the song at doing what it's trying to do? And so then I would go back and collect all of the 6 out of 10s and put them in a pile, all the 7 out of 10s, put them in a pile, and then just go through and compare and contrast. And that's really where it got hard was, yeah, like you said, like having these long, Gabriel era songs, something like The Cinema Show or something versus like anything she does from Invisible Touch. Like how do I really, like how can I actually pick which is better of those two? So it just, there was a lot of switching things up, a lot of second guessing, a lot of second guessing, as my wife can attest, as I tried to bother her because she's also a huge Genesis fan. I tried to rope her in at one point and say, "Come on, help me. I gotta have some outside perspective here." But ultimately, it was really just me kind of listening things over and over again and trying to make sense of it. But that was really the thing I hoped would happen at the end of this, is that it wouldn't just be, because I am a prog guy at heart. I do love, as you know, prog. I love everything.
I've heard
Yeah,
that.
you may have heard that. We may have had more than one discussion about this, but I didn't want it to be just a bunch of prog at the top 20, or I didn't want it to feel like that. But also, I just happen to love everything they've ever done, so it kind of organically worked itself out. I think in this way where it's not all one kind of music in one section or the other. I feel like it's fairly well melded in there. There's a lot of stuff from Duke, which is one of my favorite Genesis albums, kind of toward the bottom, the best section of the list. So that was my hope, is that it would sort of work its way out like that, to where it'd be fairly mixed.
How much did the experience of working on this change your opinion on like certain songs or even certain albums?
One thing that it kind of reinforced for me is how much I absolutely love the B-sides.
Yeah.
I always, there are a few B-sides that I play a lot. Evidence of Autumn is one. There are a few that tend to pop up on my list a lot, but kind of going back through is like, man, I guess I didn't realize how strongly I felt about some of them. So that was one thing that definitely kind of stood out for me. It was like, man, I don't know if it's some kind of sign of a band's greatness if their B-sides are that good. But for me, it's like the only 2 bands I can think of at the top of my head who have B-sides that are that good are Radiohead and Genesis. And those are my 2 favorite bands, so that's probably why I'm saying that. But that must be some indication of a band's greatness. But, that's one thing. And then, as a couple people have pointed out to me, like, you really don't like From Genesis to Revelation. I've had a lot of people say that to me. It's, yeah, guilty as charged. It's like I honestly, that album never really resonated with me, and so I don't listen to it very often. Occasionally, just almost out of guilt, because I love Genesis so much. But it's like going through and like, man, these songs are just not on anywhere in the same universe as even Trespass, which came after it. So those are a couple things that stood out to me. But yeah, it was interesting. And then a lot of stuff that was like, yeah, this is kind of what I expected it to be.
So Calling All Stations is like the lone album that Genesis makes after Phil Collins exits the lineup in the mid 90s. So Ray Wilson comes in. And so how do you feel about that record? And like, what's the highest ranking from the album on the list? And, how did it end up that high on the list, I guess?
Yeah, I think, by the way, for me, I always think that Ray did as good a job as he could in a very unenviable situation, replacing Phil Collins.
Absolutely.
Like, that is I don't even know how a person would have done that. So that's not one of my favorite albums. It's probably, I would say definitely, it's bottom 2 in the catalog for me. But I don't think any of that really has anything to do with Ray. I think it's just the songs just don't hold up as a whole compared to anything else they did. But there are some strong moments on there. I think Congo as a single was a really good song. I've always thought that was a super catchy song. And if I'm not mistaken, that's one of the two top picks for me on this list. But I believe the
Yeah,
Dividing Line was my top pick from the actual album, and it's just such a
that's a great tune.
yes, it's such a cool. The instrumental stuff in that song is just so well played. It has a lot of energy, which I think is one of the weak spots on that album. Is just a lot of it feels so produced, and it doesn't quite have that same spark that a lot of the classic Genesis stuff does. But the drums on that song are really great. They add that kind of punch that a lot of the classic Collins drum parts have. So that's the one. Those two really hold up the most for me. And there's some actual B sides from that era I'll mention as well that really surprised me when I listened back to them. That were really interesting and I'd kind of forgotten about. But yeah, that album is for me it's a bit of a mixed bag compared to the other stuff. But I listened back to it. Yeah, Congo and Dividing Line. Those two hold up for me.
Yeah, it's a cool album. It's interesting. Like certainly, We Can't Dance and Invisible Touch had like some longer epic Genesis
Hmm.
tracks, but I just remember getting the Calling All Stations record at the time and like hearing a song like "There Must Be Some Other Way" and like you said, the Dividing Line.
Hmm.
I was like, oh man, there's some great like epic Genesis
Yeah.
tracks on this record. Like so. It was an interesting record to digest at the time, but also instrumentally, as always seemed to be the case, like Mike and Tony were doing some really cool things instrumentally on that record.
Yeah, they really did have some good quality moments for me, particularly Tony. And me, Tony's always been really like the heart of Genesis. He was there
Yeah.
through it all, and it always makes me a little bit sad because I don't think a lot of people know how much he contributed as a writer and
Hmm.
and a player, obviously. But it's just because he's a little bit more reserved, he doesn't quite get the star power quality that Peter or Phil did, and he's a little bit more reserved on stage, doesn't have that same kind of big personality, and his solo career didn't do as much as the other guys. So I think people tend to forget that, but yeah, for me, Tony always did his thing right up until the end of the band. So I gotta rep Tony a little bit and mention that for sure.
So, without spoiling what the top song is, I'd love for you to kind of explain how you arrived at that being the top choice on your list.
Yeah, I knew for sure that it was going to be one of three songs. Yeah, I won't give it away, but for me there are three that leap out as 100% it has to be one of these three songs because they just sort of define particularly Tony Banks, I think, as a writer and just the imagination of the band at their peak. So I knew it was going to be one of three, but ultimately, I had in the back of my mind, it's got to be this one. It's maybe an obvious pick in a lot of ways, but I just don't. It's one of those things. I think if you try to argue against it, it's like you're trying to get around it,
Yep.
and it just. I think if you look at objectively the band and kind of their statements about this particular piece, it's one of those that the band has maintained. Pretty much all of them has held up really well. Pretty much everyone has great things to say about this song and what it captures at the band at their peak. And yeah, I couldn't find a reason to not pick it. I almost in a way felt like I was doing the boring thing by picking it, but for me there was no argument against it. Maybe the songs that I picked at 2 and 3, I could make a case for those for sure. And actually, my wife, when she saw my list, she thought I should have picked the song that's at wait, make sure I get this right. Yeah, the song I have at number 2. She said it should have been
Yeah.
like, you're crazy. How did you not pick that? Because that's her favorite song of all time. So we had a little bit of an argument about that. But Genesis arguments in the Reed House. What are you gonna do? But
It's just, as we call it, like Wednesday,
yep,
Thursday, typical day of the week type
yep,
stuff.
typical day of the week. That's for sure.
All 180 Genesis songs ranked from worst to best. That's right now at the Ultimate Classic Rock website for people to spend just hours reading, because when you first put this thing into the back end of the site, I think it was like at 4,000 words, and I watched it go to 5,000, 6,000, and I think it topped out somewhere around 14,000 or 15,000
Yeah,
words.
it's somewhere in the middle. I think it's like 14.5. But yeah, we would always have these discussions. You'd say, "You're up to 8 now. When is this thing gonna? You're really going past that?" Yeah. So it takes a chunk of time to get through it, but hopefully, if you're a Genesis fan and you have a couple extra days on your weekend, you can sift through it. But yeah, hopefully there's something that people will enjoy in there. Hopefully they'll learn a little bit. But it was definitely an undertaking putting it together, so I hope someone enjoys it.
Ryan Reed, thank you so much, man. This was a lot of fun.
Absolutely appreciate it, Matt.